What do I mean by that? That in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that he descends time and time again, Sambhavami yuge yuge. He descends again and again for the purpose of dharma samsthapanarthaya, for the purpose of establishing dharma. Simultaneously, this is talked about in 4.7 and 8 in the Bhagavad Gita. Simultaneously, Krishna also talks about another purpose for which he descends, and that is talked about in 4.9. Janma karma chame divyam evam yo vetti tatvatah tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti so Arjuna. So there are these two. So this he talks about how by hearing his pastimes, everyone can develop love for him and they can attain him. And that is an equally, if not more important aspect of his pastimes, purpose for his appearance. So the idea over here is to understand this theme that the Lord's appearance is multi-level. He appears at an external level for establishing dharma in the world. And at internal level, he appears for establishing prema in the heart. And the dharma that he establishes is at that, for that time. The nature of the world is sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa. Sakale neha mahata. By the power of time, dharma becomes deteriorated, becomes lost. And then that's why yuge, the Lord has to come again and again for establishing dharma. However, so in one sense, his purpose of establishing dharma is external and circumstantial. He establishes dharma in the external world and in particular set of circumstances. However, what about other times? When there is adharma in the world, what happens at those times? How can people be elevated at those times? So for that purpose, there is something different. For those times, the next verse is described, and that is what Kunti Maharani talks about when she says that actually bhavesmin klishyamananam avidya kama karma bhi, that shravana smarana arhani karishyan iti kechana, that bhavesmin klishyamananam, in this world there are always distresses, and these distresses are caused by ignorance that leads to worldly desires. Avidya kama karma bhi. And how can this be countered? The way to counter this is by the establishment of, by hearing Shravan Smarana Arhani Karishyan iti kechana. When people are attracted toward the remembrance of the Lord, then by that, what happens is their consciousness becomes elevated and then they attain the Lord. So that is the eternal and internal purpose of the Lord's appearance. The eternal and internal purpose is what? To give humanity for all time resources for remembering him and thereby raising human consciousness towards the divine. So in that sense, if we consider this is the divine level, the spiritual level, this is the material level. So at the material level, whenever there is disorder, the Lord descends from the spiritual level to the material level to establish order over here. So that is a circumstantial and external purpose of his appearance. Simultaneously, at this material level, even after the Lord has disappeared, when we remember the Lord, what happens is our consciousness rises to the spiritual level. So the descent of the divine is meant to inspire the ascent of the human consciousness. The descent of a divine from the spiritual domain to the material domain is meant to inspire the ascent of human consciousness from the material level to the spiritual level. So how does this happen? This happens not just through the Lord's appearance and his demonstration of his pastimes, but primarily through the reciting, through the recording, reciting, and repeating of his pastimes by his great devotees. So among the so this is primarily done in the Valmiki Ramayana. So it's interesting how the Valmiki Ramayana is told. It's the retelling of the Valmiki Ramayana it goes parallel with the enactment of the Ramayana. That means, see, normally when generally if a famous person is living, sometimes that person may write their own autobiography, somebody else may write their biography. Sometimes after the person dies, then that somebody else may write their biography. So that means there are different ways in which a person's activities may be preserved for posterity. That person themselves write, or somebody else writes. And somebody writes while that person is there, or that write after the person has departed. Now, what happens with respect to Valmiki is that he is existing, and at the same time, Lord Ram is also existing. And he is noting down the pastimes of Lord Ram. So it is like sometimes if say a journalist writes a biography of a particular politician, then now it's a mundane example, and I will qualify this example a little later. But then sometimes the politician may give a big speech, or maybe in a mega event, and this journalist may also be a part of that event. Sometimes a major interview of that journalist may be conducted by this particular major interview of that politician might be conducted by this journalist. So the journalist is telling the life story of the politician, and that journalist is also a character in that particular biography. So in that sense, Valmiki is similar. Valmiki is, of course, not a journalist. He's a saint. And that there is a big story which demonstrates big and beautiful story about how Valmiki is transformed. His heart is transformed simply by the chanting of the names of Lord Ram. Most of us know that story. But the point is, Valmiki Muni himself appears in the Ramayana because his life and Lord Ram's life coincide in some ways. So he appears as a character in the Ramayana. And another way Lord Ram's story and Valmiki's telling of that story intersects is toward the end. When Love and Kush, they grow in Valmiki Muni's ashram, when Sita is sent away from Lord Ram's kingdom, at that time, Love and Kush grow up in Valmiki Muni's ashram. Sita gets shelter over there. And then they learn the story of Lord Ram. But significantly, they learn the story of Lord Ram without knowing their relationship with Lord Ram. So Sita, they don't know who their father is. But they hear the story of Lord Ram and they're captivated by it. They love it, they memorize it, they recite it. And then while reciting it, what happens is they once are sent by Valmiki Muni's expert arrangement they are sent to the kingdom of Lord Ram. And when they are sent to the kingdom of Lord Ram, Ayodhya, and there Lord Ram, he is on a vigilance tour of his kingdom. And there he sees people are congregating and they are in ecstasy. And he wonders what is happening. And he finds there that these two, they are just, you could say, children. These two enchanting uh, children of some hermits, they are reciting his pastimes. And everybody is immersed in hearing those pastimes. And that immersion is so great that not only Lord Ram, but Lord Ram's entire family at that time, all the residents of Ayodhya, including his relatives, they all become enraptured in hearing the pastimes of the Lord. So now what is happening? It might seem very egoistic. There are people who write their own autobiographies. There is one person, one politician who has written 27 autobiographies. That means he has written 27 nearly 1,000 pages books describing his own life story. Not satisfied writing one book. It means my life is so adventurous that he's written 27,000 pages about his own life. And okay, maybe that their life was so interesting. Maybe that person is a good author. You can write about it. But how much? So is Lord Ram like that? Oh, my life story is so glorious. I want to hear it. And just see how absorbed I am in hearing my own life story. No, that is not at all the theme over there. The theme is that Lord Ram is demonstrating a principle over there. This is the Valmiki. Every book has a driving question. The Bhagavatam's driving question is that what is the duty of a person about to die? The Mahabharat's driving question is, what is dharma? What is duty? Not the Antakala dharma, but dharma in general. And that is also the driving question of the Bhagavad Gita. Prichhami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha. What is dharma? What is the right thing to do? So, just as each of these epics, Mahabharata and the Bhagavatam is more of Purana, not exactly an epic in the normal sense of the word. But just both of these classic books have the driving question. The Ramayana has a driving question. And that driving question is, what are the characteristics of the ideal person? Who is there a person who demonstrates such ideal character? So Valmiki Muni asked this question to Narad Muni. And at that time, Narad Muni recites a list of characteristics. And then he says, Lord Ram exhibits these characteristics. And then there is a summary recitation of the Ramayana. And Valmiki Muni at that time, through a dramatic incident, gets the poetic inspiration to compose the Ramayana in its particular meter. So from his shoka comes shloka. From his grief comes his poetry. So what is happening over here is that the whole purpose of the Ramayana is to demonstrate ideal human behavior, the character of the ideal human being. And that is why within the Ramayana itself, within Valmiki Ramayana, Lord Ram's divinity is not excessively emphasized. It is definitely a theme. Definitely it is a recurrent theme. On many, many occasions in the Valmiki Ramayana, it is mentioned that Lord Ram is actually Vishnu himself who is descended to the world. However, because the purpose of the Ramayana is to demonstrate ideal human character who is willing to sacrifice to any extent for performing duty. So for that purpose to be fulfilled, Lord Ram's divinity is downplayed. Why? Because if somebody is facing great difficulties and we come to know that, oh, that person is, somebody does some very extraordinary feat. Somebody gives great charity. I mean, that's nice. But if we come to know that person is like a billionaire or a trillionaire and that charity is no effort for them, then we may say, okay, what's so great about the charity? But if somebody gives so much charity generously, even when it hurts them, even if it causes deprivation to them, then it becomes especially laudable. It's like the stories of Rantidev and Shibi, who are ready to sacrifice their own comfort and even their own life, their own body for others. That's especially glorious. So what happens is, people may say, if Lord Ram is God, God can do anything. So what's so great about his sacrifice? He's omnipotent. For him, what is difficult? For him, nothing is impossible. So what's so great about his performing sacrifices? So when this perspective may cause people to downplay the extraordinary example of service and sacrifice that Lord Ram demonstrates. So to prevent that from happening, Lord Ram is depicted as a human being performing his duty amid extraordinary duress. And that is why there are many occasions in the Ramayana where Lord Ram seems to be unaware of his divinity, that he seems to act almost like an ordinary human being. So for example, the first time when Indrajit attacks Lord Ram and his army and uses the Sarpastra to knock all of them unconscious, then Garuda comes over there and he drives away all the snakes and revives Lord Ram and his army. And at that time, Ram asks Garuda, who are you? Who are you who has done such great favor to us? And Garuda says, my dear Lord, you surely know me. I am your eternal servant. So then what is happening? Has Lord Ram, if he's Vishnu, has he forgotten? Has he forgotten that this is his carrier? No, he's not forgotten that he's his Vahana. He is acting as a human being and he expresses gratitude to this glorious being who has come to his assistance. Similarly, towards the end of the Ramayana Yuddha, when the Devatas appear in the sky, and then they want to offer blessings to Lord Ram, and they felicitate him, and they say, you have fulfilled our purpose. And then Lord Ram says, how can I fulfill your, and I'm paraphrasing over here. He says, how can I fulfill your purpose? Now I'm a human being, you are the Devatas. So then at that time, the Devatas say, you are actually Vishnu descended on the world. So Lord Ram says, you tell, he says, no, you came for our purpose. He says, and who am I? You tell me what my identity is. The Devatas seem to, the Devatas seem to, at that time, they tell Ram his divinity. So the point over there is, Lord Ram doesn't go about bragging about his divinity or even constantly proclaiming his divinity. That's why now through this pastime, what is happening is, again, Lord Ram exhibits his gratitude. So when he sees all the Devatas appearing over there, what does he do? He prays to them. They finally, when the Devatas realize Lord Ram is playing his Naralila Kaivalyam, he's playing the Naralila, then they tell him that, okay, the darshan of the Devatas should never go in vain. Therefore, ask for some blessings. And then what blessing does Lord Ram ask? He says, as a king should reward his faithful soldiers who fight, taking great risk and sacrificing a lot for the soul, for his cause. But because I was poverty stricken, I could do nothing for these Vanaras who fought so heroically for me. So he asks multiple benedictions for them. He says, for those whose bodies were not completely destroyed, please bring them all back to life. And please arrange for, at wherever they may live, there be abundant resources for their subsistence and for their joyful living. So here again, Lord Ram exhibits his gratitude to his servitors. So similarly, the point I'm driving towards is that I started by telling about how Lord Ram is hearing his own pastimes. So what is he doing by that? He is becoming immersed in hearing his pastimes. What he is doing essentially is, he is demonstrating the character of an ideal human being. An ideal human being should be practicing dharma. And dharma is at various levels. Dharma is one does one's duty, worldly duty is there. In the book Jaiva Dharma, there is, which is written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there is the Nitya Dharma and there is Naimittik Dharma. So when the Lord has descended to the world, he has descended as a Kshatriya. And the nimitta, the circumstance in which he has descended, he performs his Naimittik Dharma over there. That is, he destroys the evil king, Ravan. And significantly, he does not annex Lanka. He does not destroy all the Rakshasas over there. There are no civilian casualties. It is not an indiscriminate war. It is a very targeted war to remove Ravan from power. And then the Rakshasa kingdom, he hands over to a Rakshasa himself. But a virtuous Rakshasa. That is, Vibhishan is made the king. So, and then he returns. So that is the Naimittik Dharma. Kshatriya establishing order, protecting Kshatrayate iti Kshatriya, those protecting humanity from distress. But then there is the Nitya Dharma. The Nitya Dharma is the eternal duty of the soul. And what is the Nitya Dharma? That is Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Mamanusmara. Always remember the Lord. And now Lord Ram is God himself, but he is playing the role of ideal human being, demonstrating how a human being should perform his duty always, his or her duty. So that Lord Ram demonstrates by immersing himself in hearing the retelling of the Ramayana. So in that sense, what is happening is, again, I started with talking about the Nitya Dharma and the Naimittik Dharma, that the external and internal purpose of the Lord's appearance. So Lord Ram fulfills the external purpose by establishing Dharma, by neutralizing Ravan. But at the same time, he also demonstrates the full pursuit of the internal Dharma by absorbing himself in the remembrance of the Lord. By remembrance of the Lord, by hearing the retelling of the Ramayana. And that is the first meeting between Love and Kush. And he's so captivated. He says, who are these two children? My heart is drawn towards them in a way that is not drawn towards any other child. So it's not just because they are his children over there. There is some sensation, but there's the sweetness. Oh, you recite these pastimes so sweetly. I'm captivated by this. And what happens is that this same theme of Lord Ram hearing his pastimes, his own pastimes, that theme is replicated in Krishna Leela in the book Gopal Champu. In Gopal Champu, which is a retelling of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam by Jiva Goswami. Jiva Goswami creates a setting, a non-historical setting, wherein, at least it is not depicted directly in any of the books of Krishna Leela. So in that sense, it's non-historical. But what he's describing, that there are two sutradhars, there are two narrators. And these two narrators tell the pastimes of Krishna to Krishna and the Vrajavasis. And they all hear those pastimes. So that means the Ramayana's narrative structure is used by Jiva Goswami to retell the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, retell Krishna Leela. So the idea is that retelling of the Lord's pastimes is done so that many, many resources for the remembrance of the Lord can be there. Now it's interesting, as I mentioned, Lord Ram's divinity is not highly emphasized in the Valmiki Ramayana. But in subsequent retellings of the Valmiki Ramayana, whether it be Kamba Ramayana in the south, whether it be Tulsi Ramayana in the north, I'm talking now south of India, north of India, there are many retellings of the Ramayana, the devotional aspect becomes emphasized much, much more. So for example, the Adhyatma Ramayana uses the poetic structure of the Bhagavatam. So what do you mean by the structure of the Bhagavatam? So in the Bhagavatam, it's dramatic pastimes are going on, and suddenly there is a pause for the expression of prayers. And there are elaborate expression of prayers. So for example, the very dramatic pastime of Govardhan Leela happens, and at the end of it, Indra comes and offers a whole chapter of prayers. Similarly, in Brahma Vimohan Leela, Brahmaji offers a whole chapter of prayers. So now this kind of depiction is not there. That characters offering prayers to Lord Ram is not a prominent feature of the Valmiki Ramayana. But in subsequent retellings, that is a feature. So the idea is what? That Lord Ram's pastimes are not just a historical event. Yes, they were a historical event. They happened many, many millennia ago. But the point of the pastimes is not just to report history. The point of the pastimes is to raise us beyond history. History itself, at one level, is a record of events that happen within time. History is a record of events that happen within time. So we may have the history of the Indian independence struggle. We may have the history of, say, how European colonialism expanded. We may have the history of how America got independence. So that's one level of history, where how time passes and what happens within time. But when the itihasas are being told, when the purpose is not just to report history, the purpose is to raise a person above history. In that sense, we could say itihasas are not history, they are his story. H-I-S-T-O-R-Y is history. H-I-S, pause, S-T-O-R-Y, his story. His story is the Lord's story. So history is told in the Purana, in the itihasas, so that the Lord's story can be told. So history is a means for revealing his story. And so history, yes, are the Puranas, is the Ramayana history, Valmiki Ramayana history? Yes, it's history. But history is a tool for telling his story, and the Lord's story is not just something that happens at one time. The Lord's pastimes are eternal. They're happening in different universes at different times. They are being recollected and reenacted within the devotees' hearts. And that's why there's a dramatic tradition of the retelling of the Lord's pastimes. So today, I'll be focusing on this theme of how the Bhakti tradition equips us to remember the Lord and to by providing us many, many retellings of the Lord's pastimes to help us remember. So in one sense, every katha on the Ramayana, katha means every time somebody does a Ramayana katha, that is a retelling of the Ramayana. Because it is that there is one kind of, there is Ramayana Parayan, where literally the verses of the Ramayana are read out, whether it's Valmiki Ramayana or some other Ramayana. That is one kind of retell. That is just that is more of a reading of the Ramayana. But anytime a kathakar is telling the pastimes, what is that person doing at that time? They are actually retelling the story. Retelling the story means that they are bringing their realization, their devotion, their articulation. And that is what is the oral living tradition. So there are people who read books, and it's wonderful to read books, but the Bhakti tradition specifically has thrived through the oral tradition much more than the written tradition. The oral tradition means what? There are saintly devotees, and there are saints, and there are poets, and there are authors, and there are musicians, there are dramatists who reenact, redepict, retell the Lord's pastimes. And through this oral tradition, the Ramayana remains alive. The Ramayana remains thriving. So this oral tradition, this living Rama tradition, the living Bhakti tradition which keeps retelling the Ramayana in many different ways, by which we all are provided resources for the remembrance of the Lord. That is what we will discuss today. So, what does that mean? That means that so somebody retells the Ramayana. So, is this retelling, is any retelling valid? Or only the Valmiki Ramayana is valid and no other retellings are valid? How is this to be known? Say, for example, in the 1950s, for the first time, when Ramayana movie was made, when actually people went to the movie theater and they saw Lord Ram, it's described that everybody in the theater got up and offered obeisances inside the temple because they were having darshan of Lord Ram. Mm-hmm. So when the Ramayana TV serial was first depicted, Ramayana Sagas in the 80s, in many places people would wait with Aarti plates, and the first time Lord Ram would appear, they would actually do Aarti of Lord Ram. Even now, recently during the pandemic, although the entire Ramayana series was available on YouTube, the Ramayana Saga Ramayana was available on YouTube, but the government, when the lockdown was there, to provide people something to watch, they had the Ramayana rebroadcast on Doordarshan, and the viewership of this series was actually far more than the many Marvel Universe or DC Universe movies, which had like millions and millions of dollars of budget. So there is an enduring attraction. So is such a Ramayana retelling? Because we may say it is not accurately Valmiki Ramayana, so it is not devotional. Well, that would be very categorical. But is it devotional? We say no, but it's different. So is it the same as reading Lord Ram's pastimes from Valmiki Ramayana? So that is what we will discuss today. That how the resources for the remembrance of the Lord can be utilized by us. How the resources are provided and how the resources can be utilized. So relishing the Ramayana by appreciating its various retellings. That is my theme of discussion today. So I'll be using this PowerPoint as a whiteboard and I will speak certain things. And I'll also type some things during the course of the pastime, during the course of the talk. So we could say that when we are looking at Ramayana retellings, there could be different attitudes towards such retellings. Somebody may say that we stick only to the original source. I'll only read the Valmiki Ramayana. That could be one extreme. The other is accept every source of Ram stories. Oh, there is this folk tale about Ramayana and there's this story I've heard and this story I've heard. I accept everything as authentic. So both of these, we could say, are extremes of the pendulum, and in between is accept those stories of Lord Ram that harmonize with tattva, with the philosophy and the rasa. Rasa is the mood of devotion. So in one sense, if this diagram is understood, then we can appreciate the principle. The principle is of remembering the Lord and attracting people toward the remembrance of the Lord. So Valmiki Rishi wrote the Ramayana in Sanskrit. And although the Sanskrit of the Valmiki Ramayana is very sweet and relatively simple, still Sanskrit was a scholarly language. It was not a language that was accessible for everyone. So the Rama tradition has survived through and not just survived, but thrived through the retellings of the Ramayana in vernacular languages. So now when we look at the Valmiki Ramayana and its retellings, so if we say I'll stick only to the original source, well, at one level that is good. At the same time, we understand that the Lord's pastimes are unlimited. And because they are unlimited, no single book can describe all the pastimes of the Lord. The Mahabharata is said to be the biggest poem in human history. Iliad and Odyssey, which are considered to be the greatest among the Western sagas, They are both combined and multiplied 7 times, are still less than the Mahabharata. And right at the start of the Mahabharata, it is said that this is the Mahabharata given to the Manavas. The Mahabharata given to the Devatas it's many times bigger than this. So the point is that because the Lord's pastimes are unlimited, one book cannot describe all the pastimes. And not only can one book not describe it, the Lord also reciprocates with different devotees in their hearts in different ways. And that's why he may reveal his pastimes in different ways to different devotees. This is the principle of yadyadhyatu hrugaya vibhavayanti, that with the kind of bhava that is there in the heart of a particular sadhaka, based on that bhava, the Lord manifests himself. So we appreciate his all attractiveness by seeing how his attractiveness is revealed through the hearts and the compositions of different devotees. So in that sense, saying that this is the only source that I'll hear from, well, that's one way wonderful, that at least we are hearing that source and we are sticking to that source. But we are limiting the unlimited through that. We are limiting the unlimited through that. So Srila Prabhupada, right in the beginning of our movement, within less than 1 or 2 years after the movement started, he started telling his disciples that they should start giving classes themselves. He could have said that when I am not there, you just play the recording of my classes. But he didn't do that. He said, you give classes. Why? Because he wanted to continue the oral tradition. He wanted to set the foundation for the oral tradition to continue after his departure, or in his absence, or after his departure. So yes, all those who speak in Prabhupada's movement draw their inspiration from Srila Prabhupada, draw the primary wisdom from him, but they are also the representatives of a living tradition. And we benefit because we get to hear from different devotees who offer different perspectives, and that helps us move closer to the Lord. So what applies to the oral tradition also applies to the written tradition. So but if we stick only to the living original source, then that may limit us. On the other hand, if we accept any source, then the problem with that is some sources consciously misuse Ramayana for their vested purposes. So there is this retelling of the Ramayana called the Jain Ramayana. Now, Jain Ramayana, what it does is, this is called misappropriation of religious traditions or co-option of religious traditions. So the Jain mythology, what they have within that is, they have all the Hindu gods, but all the Hindu gods are on a progressive stage towards the ultimate stage of enlightenment as described by the Jain sadhus. So they changed the whole story of the Ramayana so that Lord Ram, in his forest exile, he meets Jain sadhus and they all give him Updesh. And finally, when Sita is taken into the earth, at that time, Lord Ram becomes enlightened and then he becomes a Jain. So now this is a complete distortion of the Ramayana. Lord Ram is actually demonstrating dharma, and dharma culminating in bhakti. But a philosophy that rejects the foundations, the idea of Atma, the idea of Bhagwan, that is definitely not what Lord Ram is teaching. So if we start accepting any and every source, then there are people with their vested agendas. And they may tell the Ramayana in a way that serves their agendas, that does not serve the purpose of the Ramayana. And that's why such retellings cannot be considered valid. They cannot be accepted. We have to be very careful that so somebody may be a feminist and they may tell the whole Ramayana from a feminist perspective. And their perspective may be, oh, how Sita was constantly exploited and abused and abandoned. Now, in the Ramayana, Sita is by no means a victim. Sita is a character of great strength and resilience. And her, now, why she was sent away by Lord Ram is itself a profound pastime. But Sita doesn't treat her, doesn't feel feel she's not a powerless victim of a patriarchy over there. It is a great sacrifice that is done by Sita for a higher cause. So in one sense, if you want to understand the Ramayana, just as at the start of the Ramayana, Dashrath Maharaj doesn't want to send Lord Ram away, but duty forces Ram to go away. And both Dashrath and Ram, they do a great sacrifice for a higher cause when Ram goes away into the forest. That same theme, which is depicted at the start of the pastime, is depicted at the end, when Ram and Sita together do a great sacrifice for the higher cause when Sita goes to the forest. So the rasa has to be understood properly. So that's why both these pendulums, that sticking only to the original source or accepting any other source, that two extremes have to be avoided. So then how do we know which retellings can be accepted? So the point of the retellings is to embellish the original story. Embellish means beautify, make it more attractive, make it more relevant, make it more appealing. So the example could be that there is a solo singer who is singing very beautifully, and people are captivated by that. And that's wonderful if people are captivated by the solo singer and they're hearing the solo singer. Now, one test of the beauty of the singing of the solo singer is how many people come and hear the solo singer. That's wonderful. But another test of the beauty of the solo singer singing could be that how many other people with musical and singing abilities want to assist in that performance. So if that happens, that is a sign of the attractiveness of that singer. So somebody with a music, somebody has some sitar, somebody has something could be traditional like a sitar, somebody could be modern like a guitar, whatever it is, that they bring it and they start singing it. They start adding, they may sing, they may play the musical instrument. And what happens is they add the richness of the musical and singing performance that is happening over there. So each additional musical instrument, what it does is it makes the performance more relishable and more impactful. In the early days of the Krishna consciousness movement, when Srila Prabhupada was in New York and he would perform Kirtan in Tompkins Square Park, he attracted many people to just come and hear. Some people danced, and there are musicians who would come. And in the Lilamrit, there's a very beautiful passage, and later on there is an article in the Journal of Vaishnava Studies which describes the music of Bhaktivedanta Swami. So he says that Prabhupada, any person would come with music. They would have a harmonica, they would have a mouth organ, they would have many different instruments. And any musician who would come, Prabhupada would actually, while playing the mridanga, very warmly welcome that person. Come and join. And that would add to the beauty of the performance. So if the retellings, so every retelling of the Ramayana, it's like so Valmiki Ramayana is like Valmiki's retelling is like the solo singer, and every retelling is meant to enhance the appeal of that performance. So what let's put it in this way, that if there is a solo singer, then the Leela Katha is the original. So then there is the impact. So the impact is it is attractive. And the solo here it's not retelling, just the it just so it is the solo singing, the Valmiki Ramayana itself is treasured. It is a treasured telling of the pastimes. So what happens is, if there are harmonious musicians who come in, then what happens is the attraction becomes greater, deeper, and sweeter. So these harmonious musicians who enhance as a solo singer, they are like retellings that elaborate on the tattva, that enrich the rasa. And then when such retellings are there, those are accepted and celebrated. Now, if there are somebody who doesn't know music and they play incompetently, or there is someone who doesn't like the whole musical performance and they come to deliberately disrupt the performance. So say if there is somebody singing very sweetly, but they don't have a sound system, they're singing very sweetly. Somebody else comes with a big sound system and starts singing or speaking something entirely different from what the original singer is speaking. Then, hey, don't do that. Don't disrupt this. Go away from here. So the retellings that militate against tattva and rasa, those retellings, they are jarring. They are alienating. Those are rejected. Those are even condemned. So the Ramayana has been retold in many different ways. Now, in some retellings of the Ramayana, actually, Hanuman, so there is one particularly devious retelling of the Ramayana, many, but in which actually, I don't even want to mention this in this Ramayana pastime, but there are some retellings where Sita is depicted as the daughter of Ravan. Now, this is not mentioned anywhere in any of the traditional tellings of the Ramayana. There are some retellings in which Hanuman is depicted as if he is almost like a Casanova. He's a person who is a person seeking romantic partners. That completely militates against the mood of the Valmiki Ramayana. That militates against the storyline of the Valmiki Ramayana. So such retellings are not accepted by the tradition. So Srila Prabhupada talks about in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he talks about there is Shastra Praman and there is Loka Praman. So Shastra Praman is what is told in Shastra, and Loka Praman is what is told by not just people in general, but by authorized people, by respected people. So if we go to Vrindavan, there are in Vrindavan, at the many temples of Vrindavan, there is so much rich, there are so many sweet and relishable pastimes of Krishna that are told. Each of the places, there are so many different pastimes. If you go to Nandagram, if you go to Govardhan, if you go to Barsana, if you go to Rawal. Now, if you look, okay, is this in the Bhagavatam? Is this in this Puran? Is in that Puran? Well, some of those pastimes are there. Many of them are not there. But those pastimes are accepted. They are relished. They are treasured. So the celebrated pastime of the gopis offering the dust of their lotus feet to relieve Krishna of his headache. Now, that pastime does not come anywhere in either the Puranas themselves or in the Goswami's literature. But no pastime depicts the sacrificial mood of the gopis' devotion as well as that pastime does. So it's a retelling. It enriches the rasa of the pastime, and that's why it is not only accepted, it is celebrated. So now, this is, of course, I'm talking about the retellings of Krishna Lila, but there are retellings of the Ramayana which are also accepted by the Gaudiya tradition. So, for example, the Gaudiya tradition overall is relatively a recent tradition, 500 years. And the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, in which to which the Krishna conscious movement is connected, in which it is based, it has focused more on Krishna and Krishna Lila directly. And because it is focused on Krishna Lila, therefore, there is elaborate expansion of Krishna Lila. A retelling of Krishna Lila is done through Gopal Champu, Anandavan Champu, and many other books, to the commentaries of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Srinath Chakravarti, and Srila Prabhupada himself. That is there. So the Ramayana, because it has not been the focus of our tradition, there's not much directly written about the Ramayana. But at the same time, Ramayana was very much a part of the lived tradition at the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and at the time of Nityananda Prabhu. So now it is described how Nityananda Prabhu performed the pastimes of the Lord in his childhood play. As a child, when he was playing, he would enact various pastimes of the Lord. And some of the pastimes it is described which he enacts, those are not pastimes from the Valmiki Ramayana. So those are pastimes, say, from the Ramcharitmanas or other retellings of the Ramayana. So there is a description of Kalanemi. So when Hanuman is trying to go and Hanuman is seeking the Sanjeevani booty, at that time this demon, he impersonates as a sage and tries to obstruct, tries to divert and obstruct Hanuman. And that pastime is enacted by Nityananda Prabhu and his friends. Now this pastime is not in the Valmiki Ramayana directly, but it is enacted. That means the expanded Rama tradition is accepted by the Gaudiya tradition. So the same principle applies to other retellings of the Ramayana also. So sometimes there is, this is the concluding point I'll take. Prabhupada, sometimes some devotees say that the Ramcharitmanas is not something which we should be reading because Prabhupada didn't approve of it. So that is a very unidimensional understanding of what Prabhupada stated. So what did Prabhupada speak on the Tulsi Ramayana? Let's quickly look at a few quotes. There are many quotes of Prabhupada, and there is a compilation of those quotes also available on my website, The Spiritual Scientist. But here I'll take some quotes which illustrate the theme. So this can be say that this is one letter which is said that, which Prabhupada is writing to a letter to Raktak, regarding the two books you have mentioned, Sri Ramcharitmanas by Tulsidas, Goswami Tulsidas is not very authorized, and Ramayana is authorized. One thing is though, you have got enough other books to study. Did you appear in the examination held on Janmashtami day? So Prabhupada is significantly, this seems to be saying is not very authorized. And by Ramayana he refers to Valmiki Ramayana is authorized. But it's interesting, he's not saying this is unauthorized, he's saying not very authorized. And even then he's referring to Tulsidas by the very respectful title Goswami. So sometimes this retelling is used, or this particular letter is used, that Prabhupada rejected the Tulsi Ramayana. Actually, this is, if we see, this is in 1969, all his disciples are relatively very new, and his focus is not so much on rejecting the Tulsi Ramayana as on redirecting the attention of his young disciples towards the books that will nourish them the most. That devotees are new, and Prabhupada says that there are so many books we need to read to understand the fundamental foundational philosophy. And why are you reading this book and that book and that book? That is the important thing. So another concern here, Prabhupada may say, why should you go to Ramayana when you have got Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam and teachings of Lord Chaitanya? Don't divert your attention in that way. The author of Ramcharitmanas, Goswami Tulsidas, has a tint of Mayavadi philosophy. He belongs to the Ramanand Sampradaya. They are mixed up combination of personalist and impersonalist. So this seems to be a very much stronger and somewhat alarming critique for devotees, tint of Mayavad. So now, this question, this raises some concern. So based on these two quotes, somebody may say that there is no need to read Tulsi Ramayana. And somebody may even say that actually this is a Mayavadi book. Well, Prabhupada is not saying it is a Mayavadi book. It has a tint of Mayavad philosophy. So let's look at it further. So therefore, the author is not considered as pure Vaishnava. Pure Vaishnava is free from all material contamination of fruitive activity and mental speculation. The pure Vaishnava is simply purely disposed to transcendental loving service to Krishna. The pure Vaishnava rejects anything which has no pure idea of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada is concerned here with the purity of the retelling. So we could take this one quote, and based on that we could reject Tulsi Ramayana. See, the point is that a fundamental principle, if you want to understand Prabhupada's position on a particular issue, we need to have a holistic perspective. Holistic perspective means that consider the various statements that Prabhupada has made on a particular topic. Now, to take one statement and to make it into the absolute position, that is like knowledge in the mode of ignorance. Krishna says in 1822 that tu Krishnavad ekasmin karye saktam ahetukam atatvarthavad alpam cha tamasam udharatam. To make one thing into everything. So it is knowledge in the mode of ignorance. It is knowledge that reinforces ignorance. So here, there are other quotes of Prabhupada. So this is in the same year, 1969, in the room conversation, Prabhupada is saying, so he became a great devotee of Ram, Tulsidas. His book, Ramacharitamānas, thinking always of Ram, that is his book. So, Manas, remembrance, Prabhupada is giving like a poetic translation of Ramacharitamānas. It is a very famous book, and that is the only important literature in the Hindi language, Ramacharitamānas. So here Prabhupada is appreciating. Then, so there are multiple statements. I'm not going to all of the statements. So here one Prabhupada is quoting Tulsidas. And then Tulsidas says that he wanted to see Ram. Yes, that is devotee's inclination. That we must have. So Prabhupada is saying that this is a devotee's inclination. So Prabhupada says, Tulsidas Ramayana means Ramacharit. It is not Ramayana, Ramacharitmanas. He was a devotee of Lord Ramachandra. So as he was thinking of Lord Ramachandra, he has written. So he was a learned scholar, Brahmana. He must have read Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada is saying that as he is thinking, as he remembered Lord Ram, he has written it. And he's appreciating that he was a learned scholar. He was a Brahmana. He was a devotee. So all his translation is there on the basis of Shastra, especially Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. You will find many parallel passages. But Gita is the summary of all Vedic literature and is spoken by the personality of Godhead. So this is Evening Darshan, July 8, 1976 in Washington, D.C. So the point over here is, Prabhupada is not rejecting it. Prabhupada is saying that it is founded on Shastra, like Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam. So focus on the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. That was his focus. So Prabhupada quotes Tulsidas also. Yes, in fact, he's quoted 13 times the writings of Tulsidas as a positive authority. This is what Tulsidas says. So in his books and in his lectures, he quotes these things. So now, if we say that, how do we reconcile? Now, Prabhupada at one level, he is quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Mayavad Bhashya Sunile Hoile Sarvanash. If somebody hears Mayavad, they will be destroyed. Then why does Prabhupada appreciate Tulsidas and even quote Tulsidas? So we have to understand what is going on over here. That is there a hint of Mayavad? That actually there are some passages that can be read as Mayavadi even in direct devotional books. In Bhagavad Gita, there are many passages like 1854, which can be said to be, which some people can read as supporting Mayavad, where Krishna says, Bhaktyamam vijanati yavan yasyasmi tatvata tato mam tatvato gyatva vishate tadanantaram. In this way, they enter into the unlimited. Now, what that unlimited is, the Mayavadis may interpret it as Brahman and one merges with the Brahman. The Vaishnavas have a different explanation for that. In the Bhagavatam itself, at the end of Lord Ram's pastimes, it is described that in this way, after performing his pastimes, the Lord placed his lotus feet in the heart of his devotees and then Atma Jyoti Ragataha and entered into the Brahma Jyoti. Now we say, what is going on? This is the Bhagavatam. Why is it describing? So actually, it is describing that the Lord returned to the spiritual world. So Atma Jyoti is at his own effulgence, he entered into it. Now, what he did after entering into the effulgence? Within that effulgence, there is the Ayodhya, and he went there. So if somebody is looking for Mayavad, they can find Mayavad even in the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam. So the Tulsi Ramayana has been commented upon by Mayavadis at times, and sometimes in that way the Mayavadi interpretation becomes more and more, might become prominent on times. But the key thing is Phalena Parichayate. We look at the fruit, and the fruit is that the retellings of the Ramayana, such as the Ramcharitmanas, has nourished Rama Bhakti in a powerful way for many, many people, for millions of people, for several centuries it is nourished. Now, the Rama Darbar that is held in Ayodhya and other places where Lord Ram's pastimes are enacted, that is largely based on Ramcharitmanas. And there are people who recite the Rama and Manas Dohas, they memorize them, and they experience devotion towards Lord Ram. Now, is it completely pure devotion, free from all contaminations of karma and jnana? Well, maybe, maybe not. It depends. The different people are at different levels of devotion, and they will be attracted at different levels. But if we consider the purpose of the Lord's descent is to raise human consciousness. So certainly from mundane consciousness towards spiritual consciousness, a certain level of raising of the consciousness has definitely happened. Is that all the way to pure devotion? For some it may be, for many it may not be. So it is Prabhupada's focus is on pure devotion. Now I know many devotees within our movement who grew up hearing retellings of the Ramayana. Even I heard many retellings of the Ramayana when I grew up in Maharashtra. And where those the Marathi retellings of Ramayana pure. Now if I read back at them, I look at them, there are certain passages which cause me some reservation, some hesitation. But certainly I can say that it is because of those retellings of the Ramayana that Lord Ram entered into my mental and cultural universe and had a prominent place there, not just entered into. So these retellings can help us in relishing, in connecting with the Ramayana, relishing Lord Ram's pastimes, and moving towards pure devotion. So we as sadhakas, our focus is on remembrance of the Lord. And in remembering the Lord, the tattva and the rasa are important. As long as if something philosophically says that, no, actually we don't have to worship Lord Ram, we have to merge into Lord Ram. Then if that is a philosophical teaching of a particular retelling of the Ramayana, then definitely that is something which we will keep at a distance. If that is the categorical teaching. And there are some retellings of Rama's pastimes or Rama's purported to be Lord Ram's teachings or teachings to Lord Ram by certain sages, which are definitely Advaitic, and those we keep a distance from. But if there are certain retellings of the Ramayana which nourish devotion, we needn't go on a mission to condemn those. We don't have to go on a mission to reject them. If they nourish our devotion, we accept them. If they nourish others' devotions, they provide others remembrance of the Lord, we accept them. We appreciate them. And then we offer further resources for purer and sweeter remembrance of the Lord. So rather than seeing this as 1-0, this is right, this is wrong, rather than simply going on a campaign against any particular retellings. Yes, there are certain, as I said, certain retellings definitely they are questionable and they need to be questioned, if not kept at a distance. But we focus on the purpose. Spirituality is not so much as like digital logic as analog. So is the Ramanand Sagar's Ramayana retelling pure? Well, purity is not a 1-0 thing. Purity is a continuum. And for people, instead of watching Bollywood movies in general, if they are watching Ramayana, even if it is not pure, that is wonderful. Because they are remembering the Lord at some level. And some of them will move forward and focus on direct recollection of the Lord also. So the more pure the people who are speaking the Ramayana and telling the Ramayana and transmitting the Ramayana, the higher will be the purity coming out from that. So we seek that. But purity is not the only criteria. Somebody may say Sanskrit is the purest of all languages because Sanskrit is Deva Bhasha. Okay, Prabhupada could have gone to America and given all classes in Sanskrit. Well, who would have understood? See, purity is important, but connecting with the audience also is important. Reaching the audience where they are at and raising their consciousness is also important. In fact, that is the purpose of the Lord's mission. So in this way, we focus on remembering the Lord, relishing his remembrance, and directing our heart's attraction towards him more and more. And Lord Ram has provided us resources for relishing his remembrance. And in the Ramayana tradition, there are further resources being provided. So Srila Prabhupada provided us his books. Srila Prabhupada wanted his followers to write books. Many of Prabhupada's followers have retold the Ramayana and told in contemporary terms. And those retellings we can relish. There are books which are literal retellings of the Ramayana. There are books which are retellings of the Ramayana with certain lessons. And there are enactments of the Ramayana. Devotees may perform Ram Leela as dramas. And all these are resources by which we remember and we relish. And that's way our consciousness rises towards Lord Ram, towards pure spiritual consciousness, where we become absorbed in remembrance of Lord Ram. So I'll summarize what I spoke today. Broadly, I spoke 4 main points. First, I started by talking about the external and internal purpose of the Lord's appearance. External to establish dharma in the world, and internal and eternal purpose to establish bhava, attraction towards him in our heart by providing us resources for remembering him, especially in terms of his eternally relishable pastimes. And then I talked about how the Ramayana has a very striking structure, wherein the author enters into the Ramayana, author enters into the book, and the main protagonist is also hearing the book. So Valmiki Ramayana is the character in the book, and Lord Ram is also hearing the Ramayana. So why is that? In that connection, I discussed how Lord Ram's divinity is not prominent focus. Lord Ram is exemplifying a person who performs duty. And thus he performs the naimittic dharma of neutralizing the demon Ravan, but he also performed the nitya dharma of hearing the Lord's pastimes. So it is not he just egotistically hearing his own life story, but he demonstrates how even a virtuous king should hear the Lord's pastimes. The nitya dharma he's demonstrating. And then that theme of retelling of the Lord's pastime. So is that what we discuss through the retellings. So Ramayana is not just history. It is history used to tell his story. So that means the Lord appears at a particular time and performs his pastimes. But the point is to tell his story through history. And that's why 2 extreme approaches we need to avoid. One extreme is to stick only to the original source, Valmiki Ramayana, say in this case. The problem is that the Lord's unlimited pastimes cannot be limited to one book. And the Lord's unlimited pastimes can be revealed in unlimited ways to different devotees. And thus his all attractiveness becomes manifested in multifaceted ways. At the same time, we can't just accept any and every retelling, because people with vested agendas vested interests and self-serving agendas may retell the pastime for their own purposes, like the Jain Ramayana for converting people toward Jainism, or feminist retellings to convert people towards feminism, whatever it is. So what do? We look at tattva and rasa. That is the philosophical teaching in harmony with the Bhakti Siddhanta, and is the result attraction towards Lord Ram, is remembrance of the Lord being enhanced. And in that connection, we discussed Prabhupada's position on Tulsi Ramayana. So there are some quotes where he expresses some hesitation or apprehension. But the purpose is, but again, he appreciates Tulsidas, he quotes Tulsidas' authority. So the point is that Prabhupada doesn't want devotees to get distracted, to read many, many different books just because it's a new book. You want them to focus on remembering the Lord and cultivating purity of the heart. And that was his thrust. So for us in our particular position, we also want to get the philosophical understanding properly, and we want to relish the Lord's remembrance. So with guidance from senior devotees, and by focusing on the phala is, phalena parichayate is devotion being nourished, is attraction toward the Lord being enhanced. We can use the resources that have nourished us in the past. We can choose which resources will nourish us in the present. And we can appreciate resources that are nourishing devotion, that are providing remembrance of the Lord to others. So purity is important, but relevance and appeal are also important. And based on who is where, particular resources may be extremely helpful for people to raise their consciousness upwards. Rather than seeing this retelling simply as 1-0, yes, there are some things which are 0 and need to be rejected. But rather than putting everything in the category of like digital logic, we understand it's an analog, that the descent of the Lord is meant to inspire the ascent of our consciousness. And if we are all on the journey for the ascent of our consciousness, for different people, different resources may help in raising their consciousness. And we recognize the value accordingly of these resources. So let us all pray to Lord Ram that he manifest in our heart and enrich our heart with his remembrance, and give us the guidance by which we can become attracted to those resources that enhance our remembrance of the Lord more and more. Thank you very much. Shri Ramachandra Bhagavan ki jai. Shri Ramnavami Mahamahotsav ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. So are there any quick questions anyone has?
Thank you, Prabhuji, for a wonderful class. So it will take some time to digest. So, yeah, devotees, please go ahead. It's really late for East Coast people, devotees. So you have any quick questions, as Prabhuji said, please go ahead and ask.
Yes, Sumit Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu, I want to ask you. So ultimately, is Ramcharitmanas a book for us to read? I know it, like it is for remembrance you mentioned, but is it a book that one should read?
Well, it's not should. Certainly, if it helps us in nourishing our remembrance of the Lord, we can read it. There's no mandate. Is it like the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavatam? These are books which are core to our tradition. Those we should read. Other books, we can read them. There are devotees, Radha Govind Maharaj, Gaur Govind Maharaj. Radha Govind Maharaj especially does his kathas based on the Tulsi Ramayana quite often. When Gaur Govind Maharaj was asked about the stint of Mayavad, he made the same point. He said, if you want, you can find Mayavad even in the Bhagavatam, in the Gita also. He said, I have read the, you tell me where the Mayavad is there, and then we will see. So there are many devotees in our movement who were nourished by Ramcharitmanas and who are now definitely devotees in the position of exalted spiritual leaders in our movement. And so they do read and relish the Tulsi Ramayana also. So I would say that it's not, see, every tradition has a canon. Canon means those are the central books of the tradition. So in the Gaudiya tradition, we could say that the books of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the books of the Goswamis, the books of Chakravarti Pad, these are like and of course for us within the Gaudiya tradition, within ISKCON, the books of Srila Prabhupada. These are the canonical books. They are the central books in our canon. At the same time, there are books beyond those canonical books, which are also important books. So the Tulsi Ramayana will fall in that category of books. So the Ramayana itself, Valmiki Ramayana itself, will be like a canonical book for us. But the Tulsi Ramayana would be a retelling which we can read if we want to. So now, should we read it? It's not a matter of should. The canonical books are something which we should read. Prabhupada did not institute a Bhakti Shastri exam based on, or even Valmiki Ramayana, what to speak of Tulsi Ramayana. He considered certain books are foundational for us to study. The Bhakti Shastri, Bhakti Vaibhav, Bhakti, the various levels of Bhakti Sarvabhauma and others. He had certain books which he emphasized. Apart from that, other books can also be read. It's not that they should be, but they can be. Okay. Yes, Maltipriya Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to you, Prabhu. A wonderful lecture, Prabhu. I had a question about Mahajans. I read that Janaka, Bhishma, Kapila, they're all great Mahajans. Can you explain to me how Janaka is also a Mahajan? I've never read about glories of Janaka and how he's a great devotee of Krishna, that he's glorified as a Mahajan. And second question I have is
one question at a time. Let's see. Now, as far as Janak is concerned, there are multiple. I have also inquired about it, and I don't have a definite answer. I'll tell the best understanding that I have got by reading and hearing. See, the name Janak is also considered to be like a epithet. It's like a title. It is both a proper noun and a common noun. Proper noun is the name of a particular person. Common noun is like a title. So like Prabhupada is both a proper noun. For us in ISKCON, there is one Prabhupada, that is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. But Prabhupada is also a common noun. So for the Gaudiya Math, it is Bhaktivedanta Swami Thakur who is Prabhupada. Now, if you go to Vrindavan, they say they use in the samadhis of Jiva Goswami, they say Jiva Goswami Prabhupada. So Prabhupada can be a common noun and it can also be a proper noun. So similarly, there are places in Gita, in explanations of Gita, where I read that Janak refers to a common noun. So which particular Janak is being referred to can vary from person to person. Having said that, the King Janak Maharaj, who is the father of Sita, there are descriptions of how he, while he was a king and who did his duties diligently, he also supported a spiritual culture wherein he encouraged sages to come and have discussions, and he himself facilitated those discussions. In the Upanishads, there is a description of, especially in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Janak asks about what is the ultimate reality, and there are various sages who answer. Yajnavalkya answers finally, and then there are other places where Janak Maharaj has discussions even with female hermits. So he, while being a karma yogi who established dharma in his kingdom, he also focused on the Param Satya, on the search for the ultimate reality. And he not only protected the Brahmanas, but he actively sought that. So he was doing his karma in terms of doing his Raja Dharma. At the same time, he was also striving for yoga by seeking to know the ultimate reality. And there are stories, the stories also of him being very eager to hear the Lord's pastimes or hear Param Satya in general, even when he could easily have made excuses or got distracted to other things. So Janak could refer to some other king about whom we don't know, or it could refer to the father of Sita, who did both, who was a competent king and who was also a committed seeker of the absolute truth. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. The second question was, you gave a recent lecture maybe about 2 years back on Nama Ramayanam. So I just wanted to hear that again tomorrow, being Ramanavami. Is there a link? Can I go to your website or?
Yeah, I think it's not one lecture. It's a series of meditations on Nam Ramayan. So if you just search for Nam Ramayan, the various names, I have commented on them. You will find it on the spiritualscientist.com.
Okay, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Prabhu, yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
Please,
Raman
please.
Krishna Prabhu.
After.
Raman Krishna. Yeah.
Okay. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you so much for that very, very wonderful, always balanced lecture, Prabhuji. Very, very mature lecture. The way you started the class itself, Descent of the Divine is meant to inspire the ascent of the human. It is super, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. Also, I really liked the way you gave balanced perspective about accepting the retellings of the Sampradaya. I really connected to that very much because there are several Telugu versions, Prabhuji, of Ramayana, Tikkana Ramayana, Molla Ramayana, and also Bhagavatam. There are Potana Bhagavatam. So I know that we are aspiring for something really pure, but it's a journey and accommodating existing retellings. Thank you so much for. I hope ISKCON does it that way. I know you are that way, but I hope ISKCON does it that way, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. My question, Prabhuji, is what? So for any sampradaya, we know that Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, 3 are like Prasthanatraya. They're considered the basis of any sampradaya. That's okay, but why Ramayana and Mahabharata are not in the canon of Gaudiya Sampradaya, Prabhuji? Why are they not considered main books?
Okay. Or 2-3 different points over here. First is the Prasthanatraya. Let's look at the traditional perspective and then we'll look at ISKCON specifically. The Prasthanatraya was primarily meant for determining the nature of ultimate reality. So now, if you see specifically, there are 6 systems of philosophy within the broad Vedic school. They are called because the orthodox or traditional, and there are heterodox schools like Jainism, Buddhism, Charvakism. Now, even within these 6 systems of philosophy, there is one system, Vedanta. And what we call as Prasthanatraya is the authoritative source of a source of authority for those who are followers of Vedanta. So apart from that, there is Sankhya, there's Mimamsa, there is Nyaya, and they don't consider this Prasthanatraya to be the primary thing. So, for example, if there are proponents of Mimamsa and Nyaya, they may not necessarily comment on these books, but it is primarily for the Vedantic tradition. Of course, what happened as the Vedantic tradition became more and more influential, then over a period of time, other traditions, other traditions within the broad Vedic tradition also started supporting their own philosophy using the Vedantic traditions with the authority source of the Vedantic tradition. See, what happens is there are 2 aspects for any living tradition, that the tradition has its own sources of authority, and there are sources of authority that are considered authoritative in the society that they are living in. So, for example, in today's world, if we want to attract people to Krishna consciousness, fundamentally we may have to talk about the existence of the soul and existence of God. Now, we can quote Gita verses for the existence of the soul, but that may not be the most convincing for people today. That's why we may draw some evidence from science. We may draw some evidence from contemporary experience, contemporary systems of knowledge. So these are not our primary sources, but they may be primary for our audience, even before they come to our primary sources. So similarly, within the Vedantic tradition, the commentary on the Prasthanatraya was considered foundational for that tradition to be considered authoritative. However, this was also, you could say, a historical phenomenon. In the sense, there are many scholars of the Vedic philosophy before Shankaracharya. And they didn't comment so much on the Prasthanatraya. So if you see, for example, the Alvars, they are considered very great saintly people. Their books are considered like the Ubhay Vedanta, it's like a parallel Veda. But they didn't comment on those things. So what happens is, within the broad Vedic canon itself, certain books may become more prominent at particular times. So Shankaracharya commented on the Prasthanatraya, we could say. He had his own reasoning why these 3 books are important. And he commented on that. And then when his teachings became especially prominent, at that time, to counter his teachings, the Vaishnava Acharyas had to establish Vaishnava Siddhanta. But then, because he had commented on certain books, so they took those same books and showed actually these books don't teach what Shankaracharya is teaching. Exactly. That the books are, in one sense, much more reasonably explained with the Vaishnava Siddhanta than the Advaitic Siddhanta. So if you see, although the Prasthanatraya is considered important, Prabhupada didn't comment on the Prasthanatraya. Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Thakur didn't comment on the Prasthanatraya. The last Acharya who commented more or less on the Prasthanatraya was Baldev Vidyabhushan in our tradition. Actually, you can say not the last, only Acharya in our tradition. But then what happened is, after once modernity came to India, Prasthanatraya was not so relevant. how many of us were attracted to ISKCON because ISKCON has commentaries on Prasthantra? No, we didn't even know about Prasthantra. So what happens is, at different times in history, different books may be considered of primary importance. In fact, only recently I came to know that when Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's disciples, early disciples, they went to Europe, they didn't even carry Bhagavad Gita with them. And they, when they gave some important talks, they would actually prepare the whole talk as a speech, written speech, and they would send the speech to Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur by post to have him review and edit it, and he would send it back, and then they would deliver the speech. And in their speech, they didn't really emphasize the point that you are not the body or the soul. That was not a central teaching in their speech. They were focusing on the universality of Lord Chaitanya's message of divine love. That was their broad theme. So their primary book was a book written by Nishikant Sanyal, a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, called Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Sri Chaitanya actually. So that book, which Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur himself had helped, he had himself edited the book when Nishikant Sanyal wrote it. Nishikant Sanyal was a professor in Ravenshaw College. So what happened was, they made that book the center of their teachings. But when Prabhupada went to the West, he considered the Bhagavad Gita was much more relevant. The Bhagavad Gita was much more relevant to the needs of the audience, and he focused on that. So in that sense, the canon is not, you could say, like a frozen thing. It is that which nourishes the need, that provides for the needs of the audience at that particular time. So Prabhupada did talk about how the serious student of the Bhagavatam should read the previous Acharya's commentaries on the Bhagavatam. But Prabhupada did not emphasize that nobody can go back to God if they don't read the Sat Sandarbhas. They don't read the Goswami's books. So in that sense, the canon, rather than thinking of it as one frozen set of books, we see it as that which helps the seekers at a particular time to raise their consciousness towards the Lord. So are the Ramayana and the Mahabharata canonical books? Well, in the Gaudiya tradition, the focus is on Krishna. And because of that singular focus on Krishna's teachings, Krishna's pastimes. So Krishna's teachings is Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's pastimes is the Bhagavatam. And in Krishna's pastimes specifically as enacted, relished by Mahaprabhu's Chaitanya Charitamrita, these books are considered canonical. Now, at the same time, we will see that in these books, there are many references to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, or it is assumed that the reader knows the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The Bhagavad Gita can be understood much better if we know the Ramayana. The Bhagavatam contains many allusions, many direct and indirect references to the Ramayana. That Krishna, so the gopis, when they are remembering the Krishna, they are comparing Krishna's activities at times with Ram's activities. So that's why, although these books may not be canonical, but they are part of the literary heritage within which these the central books of our tradition are established. So definitely these books, the Ramayana, Mahabharata, are important for us to understand and relish the Vedic message, the message that can raise our consciousness. So that's our understanding. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes, Rathyatra Prabhu, you had a question, or shall we stop? It's almost 2 hours now.
Yeah, so Prabhuji, it is not exact a question, some clarification we are looking from you. Initial stage when we are sadhakas, I have seen a couple of places, if they are pure Lord Ram's devotees are there and Krishna's devotees are there, somebody suddenly asks, in Hare Krishna Mahamantra, who the Rama name points to. So I have seen little bit argument coming up, and devotees are unhappy if you interpret one way or other, even if you quote Prabhupada also. So how do we understand that in Hare Krishna Mahamantra? What is Rama referring to? There exactly. So.
Okay. So what does Ram refer to in the Hare Krishna mantra? Again, this is not a 1-0 kind of understanding, that this is what it refers to and this is what it doesn't refer to. Rather, it is at multiple level. In the in Baldev Vidyabhushan, in his Govinda Bhashya commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, he says that the Lord is reciprocal. So he gives examples that sometimes there are verses, there are poetic compositions of Krishna, and suddenly within the poetic compositions about Krishna, there is a verse about Ram. Or sometimes there are poetic compositions about Ram, and within that there are suddenly verses about Krishna. Or come closer to our tradition, we have that we have Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was immersed in not just remembrance of Krishna, but remembrance of Krishna in a particular mood. That is, of the gopis of Radharani feeling separation from Krishna while Radharani is Vrindavan and Krishna has gone away to Mathura and then Dwarka. That was the specific mood. And yet, that same Krishna, that same Lord Chaitanya, he relished going to Alalanath. He was staying in Puri, where Jagannath is Krishna in separation from Radharani. But Alalanath seems to have a Vishnu temple. So why was he going to the Vishnu temple? So there is this, at one level, there is Achintya Bheda, where Vishnu and Krishna are non-different. But then the Gaudiya Acharyas explain that when Mahaprabhu was going to Alalanath, he was not just seeing Vishnu over there. He was actually remembering, when he was taking darshan of Vishnu, he's remembering that pastime of the Lord, of Krishna, when in the Ras Leela, Krishna had taken the form of Vishnu. The gopis were searching for Krishna, and Krishna, just to tease them, to have fun with them, he had taken the four-handed form. And then all the gopis asked, they saw Vishnu, and initially they thought this Krishna, they were delighted. But when they saw this is Vishnu, they were dejected. That is the level of the gopis, that seeing Vishnu is the greatest fulfillment for any of the sages. But the gopis, they are disappointed by that, and they offer obeisances, and they ask, can you tell us where is Krishna? And then Krishna points his fingers. He's gone this way. And then they run away. But then Radharani comes, and Krishna tries to do the same thing. But Radharani's love for Krishna is so great that Krishna's hands melt away. And then Radharani sees Krishna over there. So in Vishnu, Krishna is revealed. So similarly, when Mahaprabhu was going to the Alalnath temple, he was actually seeing Krishna over there. Now we may say, but no, but that temple deity was actually Vishnu's deity. Whoever had built the temple, they had built a Vishnu temple. They had not built a Krishna temple. Well, that is the sweetness of remembrance of the Lord. That a devotee can remember the Lord, and the Lord in a particular mood also in various places. So similarly, if we consider the traditional context within which the Hare Krishna Mahamantra comes, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra comes in the Kalisantran Upanishad. And in the Kalisantran Upanishad, if we look at the context of how it is being described, now there are I have a link on my website with the article describing this. There is a southern recension of the Kalisantran Upanishad, there's the northern recension. So in one of the recensions, the mantra starts with Hare Ram. In another recension, it starts with Hare Krishna. So both mantras are in that sense valid. But the point is, if you look at the tradition, it does seem to be referring to the Supreme Lord. So it is Krishna and Ram. There are two prominent manifestations of the Lord. So this Krishna is, of course, the Krishna who spoke the Bhagavad Gita, and Ram is Lord Ramachandra. But at the same time, Ram can also refer to Balaram. So when we are focusing in the Gaudiya tradition, the Gaudiya Vaishnavism at one level focuses on remembrance of Krishna singularly and connects everything with Krishna. So a devotee tries to see Krishna everywhere. So then we will see that Ram as Balaram. Or we may see that Ram even as the one who gives pleasure to Radharani. So we have Radhika Raman Ram, That the Ram can also refer to the one in whom Radharani delights. So Ram can also be a name of Krishna. Ram can also refer to Parshuram. It's also another name. But the point is that there can be different levels of Krishna consciousness, or you could say Ram consciousness, within the name of Lord Ram also. So whom does it refer to? Well, if you see in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada, I don't remember the exact verses, but Prabhupada says that at one place he says that we can fix our mind on Krishna, on Ram, on Narasimha. The Lord has so many different forms. And we can fix our mind on any of these forms. But toward the conclusion of the Gita, in Sarvadharman Parityaja, and that section, Prabhupada says, we should fix our mind only on Krishna, not even on Vishnu, not even on Ram, only on Krishna. So what is going on over here? Is Prabhupada giving contradictory instructions? No, it is contextual instructions. So it is that when we are striving to raise our consciousness, meditating on any form of the Lord is wonderful. It's wonderful. However, if we want to develop our particular rasa with a particular form of the Lord, we will focus on that. So that's why I don't think this needs to be made into a polemical issue where we have to debate with others. That this, the Ram in the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, whom does it refer to? Well, just recite the name, and whichever remembrance manifests in our heart, that's wonderful. And if somebody is naturally attracted to a Lord Ram, and Lord Ramachandra's remembrance manifests for them, that's fine. If it is Krishna's remembrance that manifests, it's Balram's remembrance that manifests, it's Parshuram's remembrance that manifests, that's also fine. So this doesn't have to become an issue of, it is not so much an issue of philosophy where it has to be debated. It is more an issue of rasa where it is to be relished. And however a person relishes it, we appreciate that and help them nurture the remembrance of the Lord through that rasa. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhuji, so much.
Thank you very much. Shri Ramachandra Bhagwan ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
So we'll
Govinda ki jai. Jai Gaur
request all the
Premanande.
devotees to unmute, please. A big Haribol for Prabhuji. You will see in another 6 months or 5 months. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. So it's a long explanation, a lot of things to learn from Lord Ramachandra's character. Devotees, please unmute. Say
Hari
Hari
Bol.
Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on Lord Ram and for your thoughtful questions. Let us all try to relish the remembrance of Lord Ram on this sacred day and raise our consciousness towards him. Hari Hari, thank you.